Hello, everybody. Looks like a beautiful day in Summerlin today. Hopefully, you guys can hear me. Starting the show a couple of minutes early. I like to get out 30. I like to get out at dark 30 if I can, so I can avoid people. But it's a beautiful day today, so I'm just waiting to. Do I have comms? Can you guys hear me? Because usually when I walk through this area, I get dropped. So I want to make sure that you can hear me before I get into my show. But this will be a good one. I'm trying to live stream on Rumble as well as YouTube today. So do me a favor, if you guys can just jump into the chat really quick and let me know that you can hear me. It's been a couple of days since I've been able to do a live, so I'm trying to get a workout in, well, at least a walk. I'll go on like a 2-mile walk right now and try to share this with you. Let's see here. All right, so I've got my gimbal with me today. I typically like to give it a couple of minutes so I can make sure that people are able to hear me and whatnot, see me. So I'm coming at you live today from Summerlin, Nevada, and I am looking haggardly and a little congested. I can feel the barometric pressure right now from the weather. Looks like we might have some rain, but it's really nice. Feels like it's about, I don't know, 62 degrees maybe. And just a gorgeous day. We see the economy getting ready to jump off a cliff here, and the real estate market crashing worse than 2008. We can all see that happening in real time. And join me in the chat, people, so I know that you guys can hear me. Somebody just come on into the chat and let me know. Give me some 5x5s. So the first thing I want to do is just say, look, I apologize for not being able to go live as much. I am a lawyer licensed in, well, I'm a member of the bar in California and Texas, and I work my butt off and go through the ups and downs and stresses of trying to homeschool my children, keep them out of the public school system so they don't become the next generation of Lisa Cooks, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And because of all the enormous amount of stress that I'm under, I'll go through periods where I just am not mentally able to keep going, from going to court, from dealing with clients, from dealing with opposing counsel. Law is one of the most litigating, which is what I do. I'm a litigator, is one of the most stressful things and highest rate of heart attack besides dentistry there is. And so that's why I try to motivate you guys by going on these walks and doing workouts at the park to try to show you, like, if you're going to do high stress things and you're going to be involved in a stressful life, you also need to counteract that with good nutrition and exercise. And unfortunately, as we know, most lawyers, oh, good, we got somebody in here. You bought a dog. That's great. Yes, you need to return him. He's broken. Yeah, I know. I am busy. Anyway, so what I wanted to tell you guys is, if you're going to get involved in a high stress situation, which there's nothing wrong with being in a high stress job, typically high stress has the highest rewards. It's like joining the Marine Corps, you want to be the best. You're going to have to deal with the stress. Like, they're the most combat like organization there is in our armed forces, from basic on. And because of that, you're going to deal with stress. But the reward is you get to feel the pride of being a Marine, right? And just like being a lawyer, if you're a litigator like me, you're going to deal with a lot of stress. So that's just the way it is. Unfortunately. Yeah. So Um, what I would say is the counterbalance to that is to exercise. So, and nutrition. Nutrition is number one out of all of them. 70 to 80% of the gains you're going to get from a workout program has to do with eating properly. What country am I in? You can't tell by my Yankee accent, mate. I'm from the US. I'm in the US, mate. But I used to live in Motherwell, Scotland, if that counts, Jimmy. All right, so let's get into it. And by the way, thank you for all 21 of you who are joining me this morning. Let's get into what's going on with the private, secret Federal Reserve Bank. All right, and then we'll get into Lisa Cook and why, as a lawyer, I can extrapolate that yes, there's no question. The Federal Reserve is a private, secret banking cartel. And if you look at the history behind it, and you look at the way that YouTube has throttled my channel for talking about it, I think that we can get a pretty good idea of what's going on here. So it looks like Rumble just now joined in. So I have also, I'm trying to stream this on Rumble as well today, guys. So do me a favor, if you want to give me a donation or whatever, do it over at Rumble, do it over at a free speech platform. Uh, Organizations that are funded by pharma and by the enemies of the United States typically don't like to monetize channels on their platforms, but Rumble is a free speech platform. So I definitely think that that would be a good place for you to go and join me if you want to have a more serious conversation about the Federal Reserve banking system. So the US Supreme Court has ruled that the Federal Reserve Bank or banks is a quasi-private organization. They have secret meetings where the public isn't allowed to attend, which is in violation of the Sunshine Act, which requires government business to be conducted openly. Okay? So that should be a little clue right there. And by the way, there is absolutely no provision in the US Constitution at all. Number one, for a central bank, but number two, for a quasi public, quasi private government organization. That's just all hocus pocus nonsense. So, what ended up happening is in 1913, I believe it was during a Christmas recess, a bunch of bankers, a bunch of wealthy billionaires got together with their bought and paid for politicians, and our traitorous president, Woodrow Wilson, were able to enact the Federal Reserve, I believe it's the Federal Reserve Act. And under cover of darkness, they were able to bring upon us the greatest travesty in American history, a fiat-based currency Ponzi scheme, according to many experts, which has enslaved the United States into endless debt based on a fiat currency system. In other words, money that's backed by nothing. The US Constitution requires real money. Fiat currency is not money, by the way. Money, if you look up the definition, use the Black's Law Dictionary if you need to, is something based on intrinsic value. Our current Federal Reserve banking, private banking cartel system, basically they just have a money printing machine. And they print worthless pieces of paper backed by the promise of our government. Backed by the promise of our government. A note of debt, a Federal Reserve note. It no longer can be cashed in for gold. Our Constitution requires our currency to be backed by something of intrinsic value, gold or silver, something like that. Federal Reserve notes are not backed by anything of value because the promise of a politician is worthless. And we all know that. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. So now Roger says that every government is absolutely corrupt. Well, That's what happens when a banking cartel takes over your country. And we can get into Andrew Jackson at a later date and talk about how he was able to eliminate our national debt and abolish the central banking cartel, and how that really helped our country a lot. And people could buy real estate, people could afford things, but that's not what banks want. Banks want to enslave you with usury, USURY. And that's the purpose of the Federal Reserve banking system. Yes, be careful. The elites might be watching. So let's get into what's going on, because I want to give you a little bit of an understanding of the battle that's going on right now. So Donald Trump, love him or hate him, he's been a user, and many say an abuser, of this banking system in order to make his fortune. And the problem is we know that after what happened to him with all of the lawfare and the Democrat-run prosecutions, making sure they take him to court in cities and states that are far left to make sure they would get convictions or findings of liability, that he's infuriated. And by many accounts, he's traced everything back to the rigged financial system in the United States, starting with Jerome Powell at the Federal Reserve banking cartel. And the people who run the Federal Reserve, a board of governors, are basically all of them globalists. I wouldn't even want to call them Marxist Democrats. I'll just say they're globalists. And that is what the banking cartels are pushing for. Lisa Cook, I believe that she is well, I think she was appointed by Obama, but a far left globalist for sure. And of course, she hates Trump, obviously. Well, most politicians and government employees hate Trump. Why? Because he's trying to drain the swamp. So what ended up happening is, by the way, I'm walking on a 15% incline, so this is I'm going to start breathing heavy here. What happened is when Biden was president, for example, inflation was at like 9%. Don't ask ChatGPT or AI, because it always gives you like totally biased, far left responses. You'll never get the truth out of that, because the programmers are all Silicon Valley types. So just listen to me and get your news from somebody who knows what they're talking about. So what ended up happening here is, in order to put liquidity into the markets, this is how much power this banking cartel has, by the way. In order to put liquidity into the markets and to make risk on assets something viable for investors, like crypto, for example, they call them risk on because they're more high risk for an investment, because the crypto market is very volatile. So they call it a risk on asset. All right. Just trying to give you a little bit of an education here. I should have left a little early. I'm already getting a lot of people out here looking at me. What's this guy doing on this gimbal? So, yeah, a lot of people just don't know, Greg. You're right. So let's talk about risk on assets a little bit and about what's going on. So, in essence, you have a situation where Powell reduced interest rates multiple times for Sleepy Joe, when our inflation was much higher than it is now. And now all you hear from Powell is, oh, well, because of Trump's tariffs. By the way, prior to 1913, we didn't have an income tax. We had what's called a tariff-based economy. The American people didn't pay income taxes. This was all a scheme by these bankers to enslave America, and by many accounts of experts, to use the IRS as their private collection agency to enslave the American people with an income tax. In other words, Your wages now became slavery, debt slavery. And in order for the IMF or bankers to loan countries money, they look at the balance sheet and say, how many citizens do you have? Or how many illegals do you have who are paying taxes or whatever? And that's how they can get more money to the politicians. And then the politicians in turn say, hey, we'll give you an unearned wage increase if you're a government employee. We'll make sure that your district gets more free stuff. Just vote for me, vote for me. And of course, we can't afford that. And what happens is we have to borrow money from the IMF or the Federal Reserve, which is not even money. So it's Federal Reserve notes of debt. So just to give you a brief history, we can go into more detail at another date. But ultimately, what happened here is we know that the government employees, as a general rule, are far left and globalist. And why is that? Well, because they know that people like Mr. Trump want to abolish most useless government jobs, right? So government employees like to have bloated pensions and taxpayer-funded lifestyles. It's funny when you go to restaurants now, you'll find that a lot of the people who can afford the expensive meals are the school teachers and government employees. People who have small businesses, they can't afford to eat out anymore. They're too busy paying all the taxes. Now, what do your taxes get used for? A large majority of them go towards paying what's called debt service. So they don't go to pay the principal on the debt, they go to pay the interest. So that's where your money, your so-called money goes. So let's get back into what's going on with Jerome Powell and Lisa Cook. So we've just discussed that the Federal Reserve, according to the Supreme Court, is a quasi-private, quasi-public institution. Well, we know the Constitution does not afford for a quasi-private, quasi-public institution. We know the Federal Reserve has private, secret meetings in violation of the Sunshine Act. If you go on ChatGPT or you talk to a Keynesian economist or anyone who works for the public school system or academia, they'll tell you that you're a tinfoil hatter. The Fed needs to have independence. The people who control monetary policy need to have independence. Well, the Constitution says Congress is supposed to be in charge of monetary policy. So already we've got some problems there. If you're a strict constructionist and a constitutionalist, you know that there's no provision that allows this. So ultimately, we saw that the Fed was willing to cut interest rates for Sleepy Joe when inflation was at over 9%. Right now, it's around 2%, something like that, 2.3, 2.8. And we don't even know if those numbers are real because the people giving the numbers are usually also globalists who are entrenched in the government system. So the government class, the political class, government employees are basically like the nobles of when we had a king. We're basically the serfs, if you wanted to give a rough comparison. So the numbers, we don't even know if they're real. But what we do know is that the numbers were probably much worse under Sleepy Joe. But yet he got his rate cuts. And what do interest rate cuts do? They inject liquidity into the markets. And when that happens, the stock market rallies and the economy improves. That's basically how it works. So, yeah, is it better on Rumble Pro Say? Check it out, man. So, so that's basically how it works. So, recently, James O'Keefe, by the way, you'll always hear the globalists say, you can't believe anything James O'Keefe says. He's one of these radical right-wing conspiracy theorists. He'll literally get undercover video of these government employees or Fed officials saying that they want to undermine the Trump presidency. And CNN and ABC and MSNBC will come out and say, oh, he's just making it up. He selectively edits. It can be totally unedited clips. And they'll say that he selectively edits. They just make up whatever. And people have been conditioned from public schools and academic institutions to believe whatever CNN tells them to think. So that's another problem. But based on undercover video, we know that the Federal Reserve, the Board of Governors, definitely wants to undermine this presidency because the Federal Reserve has been exposed as a sham, probably more so under this presidency and this term than any other besides, well, Andrew Jackson. And they tried to assassinate him, right? And that was even before Federal Reserve, but he was an advocate against centralized banking. And so, Communist News Network, that's right, Ant. That's funny. So, let's get into Lisa Cook. Another product of what many call the DEI hire political class. Was able to use the DEI system to get into Berkeley, which is one of the most far left, many say Marxist, anti-American academic institutions in America. An Obama person, she's on the Board of Governors. She does not want to give Trump his rate cut. So what does Trump do? He finds out that, like most of the globalists in the political class, lied on mortgage applications to claim a home that's not her primary residence was in fact her primary residence, which is a violation of federal law. So he used his executive authority to terminate her employment. All right. So think about that. The president of the United States is the executive. He has the right to fire anyone pretty much for any reason. And then they have to step down, right? They have to step down, and then they can go to court and they can argue wrongful termination or constructive termination. But no, what does Lisa Cook do? She does not want to give Trump that rate cut because what is the goal of the Federal Reserve? To put us into a recession before midterms. Okay, so that's the end game. That's what they want. Their banker friends do not want tariffs to work. They do not want the American people to know that we don't need an income tax system. We don't need fiat currency. We need a gold-based intrinsic monetary system backed by something of intrinsic value like our founding fathers wanted, like Andrew Jackson wanted. Didn't earn it. That's right, Ant. So that's right. Communist culture. That's right, Roger. So here's the deal. Whew, I just went up that grade, man. That was a killer. Whew, man. Got shin splints and everything. By the way, drink your methylene blue, guys. It really helps. Okay, so Lisa Cook. He fires her, and what happens? She refuses to step down. Unprecedented. Unprecedented. People say it's unprecedented that Trump would fire someone at the Federal Reserve, that a president would fire someone. They need to have independence. The Federal Reserve, this secret group of 9 people who control the U.S. economy, need to have secret meetings. We don't want to undermine their independence. It's like, wait a minute. The Constitution says we the people, doesn't it? Guys, give me a bunch of ones. Does the Constitution say we the people? Thank you, Wills. Thank you, 4 Wills from Rob. Yeah, I'm trying to get squared away, man. It's hard, bro. I'm going to be honest with you. Being a lawyer is no easy task when you're trying to fight the system and you really believe in what you stand for. So yeah, it's hard. All right, so what's going on here? We've got Cook refusing to step down. Now imagine if Donald Trump had fired and the general said, I refuse to step down. I'm going to hire a lawyer and seek an injunction. Would never happen. Of course, many on the, well, he's a dictator. Russia, Russia, Russia. We need to fight back. We need to have a military coup to keep this guy, to protect democracy. We need to stifle democracy, right? That's the argument. All right. So, with respect to Cook, Cook is living proof that the Federal Reserve is not a government institution. It's proof. It's additional proof. We can extrapolate using the direct and circumstantial evidence that's available right now that Cook is in fact not a government employee. And another way we can also determine that the Federal Reserve banks are not government institutions is the fact that when Trump issued his executive order to eliminate all DEI hires, in other words, people who didn't earn it, but instead were put into positions of authority based upon skin color or who they like to have sex with, that's how it was under Biden, right? We had DEI, we had critical race theory being pushed by the NEA, which is basically anti-white male racism. If you're a white person, you're evil, et cetera, et cetera. That's all DEI really is, guys. It's just a way to try to divide us, which is what we call cultural Marxism. Give me a bunch of ones if you know what cultural Marxism is. If not, I can do another show about that. So, anyways, Lisa Cook, Berkeley grad, Obama supporter, MAGA hater, right? And look, I'm a libertarian, so I don't really have any skin in the game other than to use this as an example to show you that the Federal Reserve banking system is in fact a private, secretly run banking cartel based on their own admissions. Their meetings are secret and held in private. So there's your secret. The U.S. Supreme Court has already said that it's a quasi-private, quasi-public agency. Well, there's no constitutional provision that allows the government to have a quasi-private, you're either government or you're not. You're either in or you're out. You can't be both. There's no hybrids. All right. That's not permitted. That is outside the law. All right. And I know Mike. And pretty soon, all of the leftists who set him up on lawfare are all going to be convicted felons as well. And Trump already got the one case reversed on appeal, the civil case, and he'll also get the criminal case reversed on appeal as well, because it was obviously, what they did was obviously lawfare to prevent him from running for president, because they wanted to save our democracy. So go back and watch CNN, probably the wrong channel for you. This is for people who are critical thinkers who don't support the government class. And that includes Trump. Most of my audience, believe it or not, are not Trump supporters. I'm not a big Trump supporter. I'm a libertarian. I call them like I see them. All right. So Lisa Cook, prime example of the government class, relies on taxpayer funding, cradle to grave, for her pension. And by the way, guys, these Federal Reserve governors and politicians, where do they make their money? In the stock market. Who controls the economy? The Federal Reserve Bank and the politicians. They can decide whether or not to greenlight a business for a government contract. They can know in advance, and they can invest in a bunch of options or have a family member invest in a bunch of options like Nancy Pelosi and become multimillionaires. So, and that's both parties, but it's primarily the Democrats nowadays that do this. Like Pelosi, I think she's like, what, a billionaire now between her and her husband. So just to get an idea of the scam that's been perpetrated on the American people. Yeah, well, I agree with you, Oven Burn. I mean, you like the Second Amendment policies of Trump's justices are far superior to the anti-American, anti-gun, total disarmament policies of the Marxist Obama left. They want us to have gun laws like they have in Australia, where you can basically not get a firearm to defend your family. Self-defense is not allowed in Australia. You're only allowed to have a firearm, I think, for purposes of hunting or target shooting. That's what the New York Democrats want, the same ones who got the convictions against Trump. All right, so BlackRock and Vanguard. There you go, four wheels. So back to Lisa Cook. By the way, I'm almost home, so try to wrap this up as fast as I can. So the Federal Reserve banking cartel does not want to give Trump his interest rate cuts because if they do, the economy is going to explode. It's going to explode. Risk on assets like Ether, Ethereum, as well as Bitcoin. Bitcoin will probably hit 200,000. As soon as we get like a 0.50 cut, I think that crypto, like Bitcoin's going to go to 200,000. And so we know that the left doesn't want that. We know that Liz Warren hates the concept. You know, she's all in, like bought and paid for by big pharma. You know, the ones who want to give us the safe and effective stuff that you're not allowed to talk about on YouTube without having your channel demonetized, right? The same people have a partnership with the World Health Organization that Trump just pulled this out of. So these are the people who are against a rate cut. And what that rate cut is going to do is inject what we call liquidity into the markets. So, like for example, if you own Bitcoin, you're going to become a millionaire as soon as we get that rate cut, like overnight. If you sell it, once it hits and you've got like 5 or 6 coins, you're in. The problem is you're a millionaire in Federal Reserve notes. So you're still kind of screwed, but you could always put it into gold or silver. So that's another conversation for another day. Well, thanks, user. Your dad must have been a communist. So I take that as a compliment. All right. So let's get back into it. What is going to end up happening here is if we don't get the rate cuts, what's going to happen is the economy is going to tank. And that is exactly what Lisa Cook and her leftist friends want. And I believe that is why she's refusing to step down from the Federal Reserve. Because if Trump gets that rate cut, the economy is going to the moon. If he doesn't, the economy is going to collapse. And that is what this battle is about. And that is why, my friends, we need to abolish the private, secret Federal Reserve banking system and return America back to a monetary system based on the Constitution. We should not have a centralized banking cartel controlling the financial decisions of our country. We should not be borrowing money from ourselves in the form of fiat currency. That is ridiculous. And you don't have to go to an academic institution and get brainwashed into thinking this is normal. It's not normal. Keynesian economics is a treasonous economic system that goes against everything our founding fathers stood for. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. All right. And by the way, guys, make sure to join me over at Rumble if you want to have some pro-American, non-censored conversations. Hold on. If you want to have some pro-American, non-censored conversations about America, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, Rumble's where you want to go. We know that this particular platform, that the YT platform, likes to censor people like me because they don't want the truth to get out. They want to create the impression of a consensus. That's why they silenced doctors and scientists the last couple of years who spoke out against Big Pharma, because they want to create the impression that there is a consensus, because they're a democracy-based system where if 51% of the people agree, that means everyone else is full of shit. So that's pretty much the way that works. Morning. Lady pushing a dog in a baby cart. That was hilarious. All right. So in any event, Lisa Cook is part of the problem. And that is why Trump is trying to fire her, of course, because he knows she's not going to vote for a rate cut. Because if she does, the economy is going to tank and the Democrats have a much bigger opportunity to win the midterms. So the whole system is rigged. It's cooked. And in this case, cooked by Cook, many would say. And the only chance that we have, well, that's probably true, Roger, but we can form parallel systems. And the way you start is with homeschooling. Get your kids out of the public school system. That's where they get brainwashed into thinking boys are girls and girls are boys and all this weird shit that our parents would have never supported. They try to normalize indecency and Babylonian thinking. We don't need that for our kids. And we can also go to sites like Rumble, and we can do discords, and we can form our own groups where we can bring America back into a system of constitutional government, where we have a gold-backed currency. We eliminate most of the government class, which does not support we the people. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree with that. The government does not support we the people. We see that the National Education Association has just formed a partnership with the World Economic Forum, the ones who say you will own nothing and be happy, right? And our whole system is based on property rights. Uh, the pursuit of happiness, happiness is actually property. If you look at the original debates, it was changed to happiness to be a more general term, but it was the right to pursue property. That's what it was based on, because we know that if you read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, that property is the most important thing to a human being. That's it. And property is exactly what the atheist Marxists don't want you to have. They believe that the government class should control your property, that you should own nothing and be happy. And so, in essence, that's the Lisa Cook class. And now we have more evidence that the Federal Reserve is definitely not a neutral numbers-based system. It is definitely a very biased, in my opinion, anti-American private banking cartel that is based upon the concept of debt slavery. Debt slavery. And that is why they have to have the heavy hand of the IRS to collect taxes for them. The income tax system itself is a Marxist-based system that teaches class warfare. Rich people are evil, and they're the reason why we have all the problems. But no, that's not why. The real reason why we have most problems in this world is because of the Federal Reserve Bank. And we'll learn about that in more episodes to come. Yeah, we don't need to eat bugs, Mills. That's right. So if you want to learn more about the history of US currency, gold-based intrinsic value monetary systems, and the constitutional republic, I invite you to join me over on my Rumble channel. And you can see down there in the scroll, same name, but different channel, where we can engage in free speech without fear of being demonetized and censored by the Silicon Valley class that runs the platform that most of you are probably watching me on today. But hopefully you've learned a little bit about Lisa Cook, her background, and why now we have even more evidence that the Federal Reserve Bank is definitely not a government institution. It is a private banking cartel based upon debt slavery to enslave the American people with interest payments for life, just like credit card companies, but on a much larger scale. And in any event, guys, I'm going to go and get squared away. I've got a depot today. So make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper Fi, do or die, Chris. And that's awesome about Andrew Jackson. And Blue Cube, not sure what that means, but talk to you guys soon, and hopefully we can